Hello, I'm George Liston, CA, and welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. The history of education in America is largely written in superlatives, and the jewel in the crown of American education has been, for many decades, post-secondary education. The country's colleges and universities have developed a generation of leaders and gained the world's admiration for their abundance and quality. But now the leading role of these institutions is under intense pressure, threatened externally by the growth of quality education in other nations, and internally by the needs of a large, untraditional student body. It's already clear that leadership in the 21st century will depend upon the talents and energies of a well-educated population. The question before us is the ability of American universities to make the changes needed to sustain their leading role. My guest is Mary Brown Bullock, a current public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center and former president of Agnes College in Atlanta, Georgia. Mary, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you, George. It's great to be here.
It's absolutely great to have you. Let me quickly add for our viewing and listening public that you are also past chairman of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities and a director of the American Council on Education.
That's right.
You're very well qualified to be here,
I
Mary.
hope so. You had a good introduction.
Mary, as we start our first question for this conversation, I thought we might begin with a kind of look at your overall assessment of where things stand. Now, I've heard, Mary, that by some accounts, American post-secondary education now ranks 12th in the world in terms of educational attainment. I don't know if that's correct, but if in any degree that's the fact, it seems to me it's a major problem. What's your sense of where we stand?
I think that 12th in the world has to do with the access of certain populations to higher education. I think if you look at any ranking in terms of the top 20 universities or the top 50 universities, United States would still be ranked very high. That doesn't mean we don't have challenges as a sector.
Right.
And I think it's a good time to be focusing on what those challenges are.
In other words, I get the sense from you, Mary, that if we do it now, we can retain the leadership, that we're not that imperiled yet in terms of...
I think absolutely. We're still a mecca, really, for people from all over the world. And that would include, doctorates, undergraduates, postdocs, faculty still want to come to our universities and to study, do research. We are still very, very strong.
That's excellent. I want to talk particularly about the role the foreign students play in our educational system as we go on. As you very well know, Mary, this whole question of the performance of our universities has become a major concern with the Department of Education, and Chairman Spellings has commissioned a report on that, which we're going to discuss in some detail. But before I thought we turned to the findings of the report and the various categories it covered, I'd love to get your sense of the base of the pyramid, so to speak. The universities and colleges sit atop an educational structure that goes from K-12 right up through. What's your overall sense of the strength or lack of it of our educational system?
I think, quite frankly, that's our fundamental weakness, is the base, and is the pre-K through 12. We have a lot of challenges, and that's whether you're in urban schools or in suburban schools. And if you compared, for example, our high school system with that of Japan or some other countries, you would find that we're not as intellectually strong or as rigorous as some of those other countries. And I think we have particular challenges in some of our areas for minorities, for first-generation students to go to college. They don't have parents who went to college, and you start a cycle of where there are no expectations of continuance.
That's really interesting to me, Mary, because when you cite the problems as being in the years preceding colleges and universities, I was struck, and I'm sure we'll discuss this, by one of the recommendations of the Commission seeming to be universities can influence that. There can be a better integration, so to speak, of what's at the top of the pinnacle and the grades below.
I think you see that going on in lots of places. I think about Atlanta, where I was, and we had a flourishing higher education, system there of public and private, large schools, minority schools, etc. But almost all of us had some kind of program with high schools or middle schools in which we would try to bring those students on campus. One high school principal told me, I was saying, well, we'll send some of our students to your high school. She said, no, I want my girls to go to your college and to just spend a day on your campus. They can't even imagine what college is like. And I want to do it in middle school so that they will set their sights for when they're in high school, so that they'll be able to go to college.
Have any of those students entered the system already?
Yes, I think so. And you know, the mayor of Atlanta has done a wonderful thing. She decided, Shirley Franklin, that she was going to touch base with every senior in high school in the city of Atlanta and see what their post-high school graduation plans were. And if they didn't have a plan, she was on the phone to one of us or to a corporation or to a scholarship source to try to point those students to where they needed to go. And that was a wonderful example for those of us that are educators. If the mayor was going to do that, we had to really redouble some of our efforts.
I find that deeply impressive, because you have the high schools and the colleges, but also the leading political leaders, the mayor, involved in this. And the first thought that occurs to me, Mary, is an example like that is, to me, so striking. I wonder about its replication or the degree to which it's even known outside of Atlanta. Do other educators know about this?
I doubt that they know about the personal role of a mayor, a very involved mayor. But I think you would go to any major American city where you have a higher education presence, and you're going to find linkages with the high schools. One of the things educators are looking at is to whether we ought to look at the grades the last 2 years of high school in a new way. Should you be looking, in a sense, at grade 10 through grade 16, and provide more of a continuum there? Certainly,
what would that be like if you did
well,
that?
there's certainly some students that by the time they're in the 11th grade, they need to be out of a high school environment. They're ready to move on, and it may mean that they need to get out of that social environment. There are others that need the extra coaching or the extra intellectual attention. So this would not just be for high achievers, but it would be a way of creating something that was a little more seamless. I don't know how far that has gotten in terms of educational theory, but I do know that the access issues, which we will be getting to, are really dependent on trying to provide more opportunities for high school students to actually enter college.
Before we turn to access, and I think that will be the first item on the report that we will talk about, help us understand something else too, Mary, and that's the very definition of students today. I used the word untraditional in what I said as we began our conversation, and I myself am not fully informed of what that might mean, but I do have the impression that very different kinds of students are going to college this day, and they're approaching college and university in a different way. I've heard taking longer periods of time, for example, to finish their degrees, or doing, and this really intrigues me, pursuing what's called the cafeteria approach to education. What does all this mean?
You have a much broader demographic now going to college, and it's changed a lot since I was in school. One of the meanings of non-traditional are young adults, people that are older than the 18 to 22-year-old sort of traditional period. They are perhaps the fastest growing college student group today. And when you become involved in educating them, you're also often educating single parents. You are educating people who something has happened in their life that they decide, okay, now I need that college education. I wasn't able to or wasn't ready earlier. They are very determined people. At Agnes Scott, for 25 years, we've been educating non-traditional age women. We call it our Return to College, our Woodrow Return to College program. Many of these women are in their 20s, 30s, sometimes 60s. At commencement, it's wonderful, George, because you'll hear out in the crowd someone says, "Go, Mom!" As this older woman walks across the stage with tears, down her face, because it's such an accomplishment.
Do you find institutions always so committed to what we might call lifelong learning, the fact that the older students getting their degrees, but then continuing their higher education in different ways for the rest of their lifetimes?
Yes, I think where you have community or lifelong education programs, people flock to them. I understand that here in the District of Columbia there's several really top flight programs that people go to. But I think there are two different kinds of continuing education. One would be for the intellectual enjoyment. You're retired, you have time, you might even want to get a degree in a fine art, something like that. But I think there's the other kind that is much more focused and much more, okay, I need to continue my education in this specific field because now I realize that medical care is a place I can make a contribution and get a job. And so there are different kinds of continuing education.
Before we leave the different kinds of education, Mary, this question just occurred to me. As an educator, and we're speaking here specifically about colleges and universities, but do you think we're providing enough in the way of alternatives to colleges and universities? For example, I was thinking of the need that might exist, I don't know, but it might exist in society for vocational training of specific types of apprenticeship programs that used to be so much a part of our culture. Is there a role that kind of learning still needs to play in our society?
That's a very important question. Community colleges play that role to some extent, and certainly we've had an expansion and flourishing of community colleges, and they give it what's called an associate's degree, which is a 2 years degree, and that can be fairly targeted, although usually it includes some general learning. But we do not have, for example, what Germany has, which is a real technical track, and that puts people into a skills profession. I don't know that today that would be the right route for the United States to go, but certainly exploration of these options should be looked at.
The report of the Spellings Commission begins in its preamble with a statement that I found absolutely gripping. And to some extent, it suggested to me that perhaps the problems our colleges and universities face are a product themselves of success. And the phrase goes this way, Mary, that America's universities can be characterized as, and here I quote, mature enterprises that are increasingly risk-averse, at times self-satisfied, which in a word suggests complacency. Is that a problem here?
I would disagree with that.
You would disagree with that statement?
I have found that, first of all, American colleges and universities represent so many different kinds of institutions. And so I find that the educational structures are always changing because you have, as I said, community colleges, liberal arts colleges, religiously motivated colleges and universities. Quite frankly, George, we are all in the marketplace. We are all in the marketplace. And so to be successful in education, you do have to demonstrate that you are responsive to the needs of that marketplace. Now, I also think there is what I call academic time. I used to use it at Agnes Scott. Would sort of refer to why is it taking so long to make these decisions. It's not a corporate entity. You can't, as a president, go in and say, okay, I'm going to change the admission requirements here and change the curriculum. There's much more of a consensus building. So I think in that sense it does take a longer time to bring about change in a curriculum or to introduce a new program.
But that commitment to change is there.
But I do think the commitment is changed.
And
it's forced on institutions. Maybe there's external forces, there may not be enough internal forces.
And you make a very strong point, Mary, when you remind us this is a competitive enterprise after all. Access. One small word that means a great deal in our society, Mary. Here's a statistic I think is defensible, that a non-college graduate in our society earns something like 37% less than someone who goes to college, hence making this a very desirable attainment. But there are many problems for even getting in. You suggested earlier, Mary, in what you said about Atlanta, that better integration of universities and high schools might be one path to that, but improving that. What are others in your mind?
I think colleges and universities, probably especially state schools, need to go out and recruit from high schools that don't normally send students. I know the University of Texas system started doing that when they went to a different admission system, and I remember hearing the president of the system saying that he went out to some of these high schools where they had never had any applications. And so I think there is a responsibility of the universities and the colleges to look at their network, you might say, the types of schools, and to not just go to the ones they have students from. There really is a place in American higher education for most students, but they may not know that. And so I think that is one of the things we have to be better about.
So proactive educators going out and as you say, recruiting.
And for example, the public high schools, they may have one college admission counselor for a graduating class of 300 students. Those students don't get that kind of counseling about how to make applications to college that students in more affluent or private schools get. They may not have the family that's going to read all that material. Again, one of the things that some admissions group do is they donate time pro bono. We talked about doing this in Atlanta, and I don't know if it's going to take place or not, having admission counselors from the different colleges advertise a day on one of the centrally located schools and say, okay, high school juniors and seniors, we're going to come, bring what kind of records you have, and we'll spend time with you and help you think about what you might do. And we're not promoting our college. This is, we're going to try to see if we can help you. I think this issue advising is an important one.
And as you mentioned issue advising, Mary, it strikes me that would be particularly useful to a category, two categories that are very much at risk in terms of the access question. I'm speaking of minority students and disadvantaged students, that this is also a very good way of helping them get better information. And you know, that word information, Mary, struck me in this report too, and I'm champing at the bit to ask you this question. I couldn't believe this the first time I read it, so let me hope I cite it accurately, that poor availability of reliable information about colleges was mentioned as a major...
I think that's dead wrong, George.
You do?
I'm going to say I think that's
for you,
dead
Mary.
wrong.
A little controversy on the program. Why is
First of all, you can go to any college website, click on admissions or students or facts, and you'll have a lot of information right there at your fingertips. Another thing, the Department of Education has its own website. It's called COOL, C-O-O-L. Now, it's not on their home page, and you do have to click around to find it. And I've forgotten now what the acronym stands for. You can, but this is Department of Education data that they have gathered and vetted on every college and university in the country. I clicked on it just before I came up here. I wanted to see if it would work. And I put Agnes Scott in there, clicked on search. Up comes Agnes Scott. It has retention rates, it has high school graduation rates, it has 3 years of what it would cost the last 3 years with some financial background. It has admission criteria. It has a huge amount of information. So I don't think that there's a problem with information. There may be a problem with people understanding how financial aid works.
Yes, this...
And so I think that, and that's a complicated matter. It is, all institutions use a form called FAFSA. If you're looking for financial aid, you and your family have to fill out this form. It's a terrible form.
First of all, I appreciate very much your clarity on this question of the information that's available. And also what you've just mentioned about the financial information in particular being kind of a confusing maelstrom for parents and students to consider. There is a recommendation, as I understand it, in this report is concerning financial access and information, that system be streamlined as well. Does that make sense?
There are two ways of looking at this. They do recommend that they streamline their form and make it easier. And that they bring it online earlier in the year. That's very important. More people would fill it out. Colleges use it to make their financial aid decisions. So we all use a federal standard. So we need that. You need that form. It needs to be simpler. But they are also making a recommendation that wasn't entirely clear to me that suggested that maybe if they simplified the financial aid programs, they would be better. You know, I used to live in this town, and I always worry about something like that a bit. Are they actually going to cut out programs and make it one size meets all? I don't know the answer to that.
Could lead to insensitivity.
It certainly needs to be looked at. And I understand that the College Board has recently appointed two educators that have very fine reputation, Michael McPherson and Sandy Baum, to lead a group to look at how to simplify. So I think that we do need to make sense of this, but let's be careful about how we do it, and let's not throw out a very good program in this, for the sake of simplifying.
Absolutely. And of course, Mary, when these things are simplified and in the right way and made more efficient, they still, of course, answer the basic need. I mean, you get financial aid to pay for college, and that leads us directly in the question of how much you're paying and why, and affordability, another big area that was brought out in this, this report. And I think I can speak for the general public that it's just a mind-boggling situation. I mean, the cost of a college education is as you well know, and I think it's second only to a house, isn't it, in terms of what families might
well,
purchase?
You might think about it a little bit more like a car.
A car.
Let me just give you an example here. Take a state university. The average cost to go to a state university a year is $5,800, roughly. Now you add to that your living expenses, but your tuition average cost is $5,800. I think that's a bargain, George, and I think more of us need to be saying that. You think of what you get for that $5,800. You get the courses you need to take, you get access to health insurance, you get access to gyms, to coaching, you get access to libraries and computers.
Right.
And this is in a state, in a state system. I think there's a lot of value in that $5,800.
Well, I personally agree. I think it's a very effective way of putting it, Mary. It also strikes me the car takes you somewhere.
Right, and education is going to, and we will take out, I don't mean that, certainly for middle class America, I think families need to be talking as much about saving money for college as about the high cost. I've talked to, see, I'm no longer college president, so I can kind of speak my mind about this, but I've talked to families making $100,000, $150,000, and they say they don't have money for college.
I've seen that.
I think that solving the access problem is going to take, and the cost problem, is going to take all players. It's going to take colleges getting better control of their cost. It's going to take families that are able to save more funding for that. It's going to take state governments that have been retreating. The amount of state funding for higher education has been going down the last 10 years. And it's going to take federal government support as well. So
everyone has a role.
Everyone has a role. And there is almost a sense that higher education is a public good, ought to be free. Well, we're not quite there financially. There are some societies that they are there, and maybe we can get there the way we have with our public school system. But take the federal government. One of the recommendations in the report is that the Pell Grants be increased. Now, the Pell Grant is the grant that goes to the lowest income families of $40,000 and below. It has been at $4,050 for 5 years. There's been no increase in federal funding for the Pell Grant in 5 years. So there are multiple sets of responsibilities here.
And if they all cohere and everyone carries out their roles, we can see.
I think so. I think this is doable.
Right.
I really think it's doable.
And in doing it, Mary, and this is a big chapter of not just the report, but of the entire area and mission and responsibility, are accuracy, not accuracy so much as transparency and accountability important factors as well. Colleges telling us exactly what the money's going for.
Transparency is very important, and I think colleges can do a much better job on how they talk about financial aid. Let's just talk about that. I think many institutions are now giving examples. You can't tell this student what they're going to receive until you get this FAFSA. But you can say a family making $60,000 with this kind of package. I think we can do a much better job about that. I think we can be more transparent about how we talk about our cost. And that would be put your budget out there and show where the increases come. I remember it was interesting at Agnes Scott when I first got there. There's a lot of nervousness about the college budget. And someone recommended, well, why don't you put the detailed budget in the library so anybody can look at it. Now, we didn't want to hand it out because we didn't want it in the newspapers, We put it in the library so anybody's student, this is details, the detailed costs by department, by everything. And it was as though suddenly everyone relaxed. because they knew they had access to the data.
Yeah.
And I think being more transparent is important.
Is it very important? Another big topic item, Mary, and I apologize for asking this toward the end of our conversation because it's going to require an all too brief answer, but there were concerns cited about, at least with some institutions, the question of learning, that is to say, the preparation with which people graduate. And as an educator, do you see that's a significant problem?
I think that there needs to be far more focus by colleges and by people that report on colleges on the outcomes. I do think that there are a lot of indicators that we're using for assessment. There's a relatively new one that's called the National Survey of Student Engagement.
Right.
And it was created just for this reason, to try to track student learning more clearly. You know, how many times did the student meet with a professor? How many papers did they actually write? Were there changes from their freshman to their senior year? That is now being widely used in colleges. It's not yet a public survey. This is an interesting point. Colleges it was set up to be confidential to help colleges self-assess. And I think it has done that. The question of whether to make it public or not, I think, is maybe the next step.
Next step to take.
In terms of that.
But it's interesting to know that that measurement does exist, and it is.
There are assessment measurements.
Well, Mary, this has been a marvelous conversation. It certainly enlightened me, and I'm sure everyone watching and listening. And I guess this question might, as we conclude, even go without asking, but I'll ask it anyway. I get the sense from you that this is a community, the university community, that's ready to reform, ready to do the right things.
Right.
There's no question about their willingness.
I think the great virtue of the Spellings Commission and of Margaret Spelling's role is that she is using her position as a bully pulpit for higher education.
Right.
That's a wonderful thing to do. It's drawing the attention to everyone.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you, George.
And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue is also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. And please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching. And thank you, Mary, very much.